Okay, welcome everybody to VOWs 60th anniversary storytelling event. And we'll let you know who was singing that wonderful music just after the break when we come back. So don't worry, we'll have more info for that for you. But we are going to be getting started now. So I'd like to hand it over to the hosts for tonight, Janice Alton and Lynn Adamson.
You're muted, Janice Alton. You're muted.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you. Little did he suspect, I mean that man who assailed us in 1960 in the Ottawa press as a foolish group of matrons with the absurd and pompous title of Voice of Women, who dared come to Ottawa to urge the Prime Minister to help stop nuclear weapons testing. The world is to be pitied, he wrote. Well, we are still here. And still raising our voices to rid the world completely of these omnicidal weapons and much more. Now, just who is foolish? A warm welcome to this virtual storytelling celebration to mark the 60th anniversary of Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. That's our revised name. And as Vanessa said, my name is Janice Alton, and I'm a longtime and proud board member. Here we are at 60, standing on the shoulders of decades of work by wonderful women, like co-founder Helen Tucker, Nancy Pocock, Ursula Franklin, Kay McPherson, Muriel Duckworth, and so many others. And I think Lynn later is going to invite you to put into the chat any other names that you would like to add to that list. When we started, there was plenty of atmospheric nuclear weapons testing going on. This second wave of the women's movement was poised to begin with us. The Cold War was on, tensions were high, the Vietnam War was about to erupt. And there has been so much in between then and now. With some of our speakers tonight, we'll catch a glimpse into this past. And with others, the continued urgency to creatively work for a world free of violence and for a culture of peace. It has taken us to many places and put us in the company of many. About a year ago, we even took up the recommendation of UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and officially opened our doors to men. Our collective energy will help. We continue to be multitaskers, taking on the issues, many issues, to transform the old rutted system of militarism into one dedicated to meeting our common security through non-violent measures. We do this in a stream of positive energy. It is the 75th anniversary of the UN. It is the 25th anniversary of the mega Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, the largest gathering of women in history, which brought us into a global women's movement and confirmed that we are now part of a global women's peace movement. It is also the 20th anniversary of the historic UN Security Council Resolution 1325, a source that makes it international law. It declares that women are to be included in all aspects of peace building, from prevention to post-conflict reconstruction. And happily, we are now in a world awakened to the need to decarbonize as well as to demilitarize. Our push forward has many new allies, new policies, and new energy. Our speakers tonight represent us today from coast to coast, intergenerational, and with our mixed membership. We're here to celebrate with you and to warmly welcome you to join with us in our peace-building work. Perhaps you'd like to start with a look at our film, which is available on our website. So make yourselves comfortable, and we'll begin our 6-minute stories with contributions from 7 members. A short break will follow before we share with you our final 6 wee stories. And I'll turn it over to Lynn because we've added our land acknowledgement before we have our first speaker. Lynn.
Thank you, Janice. I just wanted to say on behalf of all of us that as we gather tonight, let us recognize the power, beauty, and wonder of the land. And let us recognize that these lands where we find ourselves living, wherever we are in this country we call Canada, have been cherished and cared for by Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. Let us share a call to respect our treaty relationships, and whether we are on ceded or unceded land, care for the earth, recognize the wisdom in caring for 7 generations ahead, and accept our responsibility to work for justice and true reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Lynn.
as Janice said, you can put notes in the chat if you would like to add any thoughts that you might have during the evening. So back to Janice. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first speaker tonight is Mary Lou Mcvedron. Before her appointment to the Senate of Canada 4 years ago, the Honorable Mary Lou Mcvedron was a professor who founded the Institute for International Women's Rights and specialized in human rights, while continuing her work on women, youth, peace and security, and gender justice as a pro bono lawyer. Formerly a board member of Voice of Women, she remains active as a senator in raising awareness in Parliament by working with VOW and with other civil society organizations on a range of peace-building issues. Mary Lou, I'll leave it to you to expand on that. Welcome. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me okay?
Now can. Yes.
Thank you. My headset has actually been problematic today, so I was praying that it would find its way back. So I'm glad to hear that that you can hear me.
Yeah.
Hello, bonsoir, Tanzi. En tant que sénatrice du Manitoba, je reconnais que je vis sur le territoire, sur traité numéro 1, le territoire traditionnel des Anishinaabe, des Cris, des Ojibwe, des Dakota, des Dene, et la patrie de la nation métisse. Aussi, je reconnais que le Parlement du Canada est situé sur le territoire non cédé des Premières Nations Algonquines et Anishinaabe. So the storytelling this evening is a wonderful opportunity to reflect on just what it is that I've learned from the Voice of Women for Peace. I was trying to remember the first feminist that talked to me about the Voice of Women for Peace, and I'm pretty sure it was the amazing Kay McPherson back in the early 1980s, when she also dispatched me to Ottawa to work as a volunteer lawyer when the constitutional hearings were taking place, and that of course led to the ad hoc committee of Canadian women on the Constitution that actually changed some of the wording of the Constitution. But I also remember through Kay an opportunity to have tea with Muriel Duckworth at Kay's home and being captivated by this woman's wit, by the way she calmly spoke about mind-boggling concepts that frankly, I hadn't thought very much about at all. And then I had the chance to listen to Ursula Franklin. And I knew already before meeting her about her work as a scientist and the work that was done on the baby tooth survey that really was one of the major factors in stopping above ground atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. And so having met these amazing women, I still really hadn't had that much exposure to the organization itself of the Voice of Women for Peace. I was working very closely in those days with retired Senator Nancy Ruth, who has been a stalwart supporter and funder of the Voice of Women for Peace. I know there's more than one occasion where she stepped in and helped us when things were really rough. And it was partly out of that work that I ended up being the director of a project called the International Women's Rights Project. And here's what I remember. It was 1998. It was a cold March day in New York City. And I was walking down the streets trying to find a hotel that I'd never been in to see a woman that I'd never met. I'd never met this woman, and she invited me to her hotel room. So finally I get there late. The room is packed, mostly with young women, sitting on the floor, the couches, the table. And in the midst of this gathering, there is this quiet, elegant voice talking about how the UN actually works. And I found my way there because here I was in a university heading up a research project that focused on a UN human rights treaty, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and I had never been to the UN. This new job required that I understand how the UN actually works and how it affects women. And as a result of those couple of hours in that crowded hotel room, I became a dedicated supporter of the Voice of Women for Peace. And the woman who owned that knowledge and that amazing dulcet voice, Janice Alton. What that did for me, though, was really help me navigate the halls of the United Nations, which in turn led to much better research that we did on the CEDAW Treaty, and also allowed me, as a result of the knowledge that was shared with me that day, and then when we were actually in sessions for the Commission on the Status of Women. And that went on from 1998 to my, in turn, as a result of this research project, which involved 10 countries in the world, meeting women who were part of the project, who were leaders in their countries, who also had never been to the UN. And we had managed to find ways to give them voice. And I, by then, was becoming a pretty good guide, all thanks to the Voice of Women for Peace. But the other thing that I learned starting that day in that crowded hotel room was the passion and the curiosity and the energy of young women when they discover what happens in the halls of the United Nations and how often women and women's concerns are not respectfully included, and how absolutely crucial it is that it's women's leadership that changes the nature of peace agreements, the way in which the UN Security Council, the Resolution 1325, is the first that was actually drafted by women in this for the Security Council and then carried in through the diplomatic process. And so what I know I can tell you this evening is that that beginning in 1998 in that hotel room resulted in courses that I taught as a human rights professor, bringing my students to the United Nations, and blossomed in a number of years to joint collaboration with Canadian Voice of Women and delegations that now, in this last year, if COVID hadn't struck, if we'd been able to be in New York again in March, our delegation, our joint delegation would have been close to 100. And one of the changes that evolved in my home province of Manitoba is that over the last number of years, we have always had an increasing number of Indigenous leaders who have been part of our delegation. So thank you, Voice of Women. Thank you, Janice. And thank you for the visionary women that got us here.
Thank you, Mary Lou. And I want to, you've given me the opportunity to say thank you to somebody else who's on the screen here, and that's Marian Kearns, who we'll hear from later on tonight, because it was Marian and Ann Gertler who were the first two in our organization to take us to the UN on a study consultation tour. I was so taken up by that I've been doing it now for more than 30 years. Thank you. The next person that I would like us to hear from is Dr. Richard Denton. Richard is an MD emeritus, a country doctor, a general practitioner, and a former mayor of Kirkland Lake. He's been active against nuclear weapons for 40 years, and he serves on boards that are related to that kind of endeavor, on boards such as the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, Physicians for Global Survival, and the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. Richard wants you to know that he's the father of 4, and he's the grandpa of 9. Richard, welcome.
Thank you very much, Janice. Mom hated growing up on the farm, the depression, the dust, the dirt. I had just bought a farm. She cried. Mom sat on the concrete stairs leading to the furnace, a 45-gallon oil drum turned on its side with 3-foot logs in it, and the hot air rising against gravity through the ductwork to heat the house, covered in mine siding, tar paper. Gravely, she asked, "You wouldn't add on to this, would you?" Clara Roberta Weiss had matured through the school of hard knocks, being the second eldest in a family of 6 children out on our Saskatchewan prairies. Her father, Adam, was a prosperous wheat farmer, but the dirty 30s came and all was lost. Food, and then famine and filth. If it wasn't for an uncle one year who bought a large bag of potatoes, they might not have survived. Being the second eldest and being a girl, she looked after raising her siblings. Throughout her life, she cared on looking after people as a nurse and baking for sick neighbors. A classmate of mine still remembers my mom looking after his dying mother. As a child growing up, it seemed to me that the only time that my mother baked something was when someone was sick. She, of course, baked extra for my father and I, but that is how I remembered it. If I didn't like some food, the Brussels sprouts, Mom would admonish me to remember the starving Armenians. Mom could empathize. She was a nurturer. Nursing. 1, it got her off the farm. 2, she got a room and board after the Dust Bowl. 3, it would give her a job, independence, and money of her own. She got further training by the Victorian Order of Nurses, the VON. She went to Timmins to care for the sick. A newborn baby was warmed in a laundry basket surrounded with Mickey bottles filled with hot water. It was a difficult time as a new mother bled to death with a postpartum hemorrhage out in the beyond. Growing up, I would remember if we needed something, it would be measured in the number of shifts that she would work to obtain it, at about $25 for an 8-hour shift. During the World War II, her older brother Ross was killed as a tail gunner in a Lancaster over Holland, where he is buried. Her younger brother, Gordon, was luckier and survived in a tank at the end of the war. She thus knew the horrors of war and its tragedies. Mom believed in equality. A Jehovah's Witness came to our door and telling my mother that as God was head of the church, so too was the husband the head of the household. My mother strongly disagreed, saying that it should be an equal relationship. Just at that time, my father, who was busy working on taxes, came down and told the other woman that he was a militant atheist and slammed the door shut. My mom opened the door and apologized to the proselytizer, who had a change of heart, agreeing that women should have more of a say. My mom was ahead of her time. A friend of mine was dating a man that my mom didn't think had much of a future. Pat wanted to get married, but my mom suggested that they just live together at a time when that wasn't done. In 1953, my father became chairman of the interim committee to start the Unitarian Congregation of South Peel. The Unitarians are a bit radical, and in particular, the women. Helen Tucker was a founding member, exuberant, and the social activist, organizing the Women's Action Mississauga, secretary of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, and the United Nations Society. She was also an artist, and I have one of her paintings hanging in my den. She was one of the founding members of the Voice of Women and its first president. My mom worked with Helen Tucker. The 60s were the time of the Cold War. Nuclear weapons were accumulating. The US, unbeknownst to us civilians, had placed nuclear weapons in Turkey aimed at Moscow. Khrushchev therefore put his weapons in Cuba. I, as a student, was having nuclear drills and hiding under desks. My parents had information on building a bomb shelter and moving to New Zealand. They protested in protests. Ban the bomb while you last, or you'll end up in the blast. The Voice of Women was founded to ease tensions. In 1962, they held the first international women's peace conference that involved Soviet women. My parents were members of the Voice of Women. My father said that he was a member too, but I can't verify that. But I remember getting Soviet magazines printed in English. I couldn't understand Russian humor. Later, VOW protested the war in Vietnam and did exchanges with Vietnamese women and knitted children's garments, similar to the Unitarian Service Committee. As a child, I saved my teeth for the VOW tooth fairy to be assayed by Dr. Ursula Franklin for strontium-90 that was in milk and demonstrated that nuclear fallout from bomb testing was affecting our health. Radiation was a global problem. This helped stop the atomic bomb testing with the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963 for the atmosphere, ocean, and outer space testing, but allowed underground testing to continue till the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty of 1996. I had learned from my mother that women are good multitaskers, can mediate not only children's quarrels, but create lasting peace by looking at the underlying causes of conflict, and are the true doers in the world, women of action. I am proud to be a member of the Voice of Women for Peace, working with education, collaboration, and advocacy. As Kay McPherson, the second VOW president, said, every meeting a party and every party a meeting. Let's celebrate VOW's 60th anniversary. Hooray! Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I'm glad you're a member too. Our next speaker is Hannah Haddican. Hannah is on our board and she's also co-chair. I stepped off as co-chair about a year ago and Hannah stepped in. It's wonderful that we have her strength at that level. Hannah is a long-standing feminist, peace, human rights, and social justice activist. She is deeply committed to addressing structural causes of war, poverty, social inequality, environmental degradation, and promoting a vision where differences are respected and honored.
Thanks very much, Janice.
We look forward to hearing your story.
Thank you, Janice. The daughter would be left behind. She was not joining those that were going to be immigrating. Her mother pleaded with the son-in-law to reconsider, persuade his wife to join the group arranging to emigrate. But their decision was final to remain in Russia. The mother fell to her knees. She was overcome with grief. This was her only daughter, and they may never see each other again. She was a widow, her husband having died while in forced exile, and this was almost too much for her to bear. My aunt was telling me the story of the Great Migration. My ancestors were pacifists. They were harshly persecuted for their refusal to do military service and to join the Russian armies. They had also stepped away from the established church, believing that rigid ritualism, dogma, and the worship of icons differed vastly from the simple worship of the teachings of Christ. These actions by the Doukhobors resulted in severe punishment, oppression, including the destruction of communal villages and established settlements, which were in the fertile valleys. But this was also followed by exile into remote areas of the Caucasus Mountains, desolate areas of Turkey and Azerbaijan. In 1841, a woman, Lushechka, she became a spiritual leader, and she took the leadership role quite seriously. She ensured that Doukhobor women were to be considered as equal in status conferred by the divine presence in all human beings. Women participated in the design and construction of villages, physically plowing fields for spring planting, managing family finances. Lushechka, who had a unique approach to domestic violence. The husband would be placed in the chicken coop for a certain period of time. This public shaming, according to the stories my grandmother told me, was a successful technique. Women were also the healers, the midwives, and in general caretakers of children and the elderly. In 1887, compulsory military service was introduced into the Caucasus. The villagers collected all their weapons and on June 29, 1895, destroyed these in a massive fire now known as the burning of the arms. Cossacks on horses attacked the crowd with whips and batons, resulting in several casualties, while the circle of villagers continued their singing and praying. This defiant act resulted in further persecution and exile of young men to Siberian prisons. Around this time, Leo Tolstoy, the famous Russian author, heard the plight of these Christian peasants and the punishment they were subjected to by the state, the monarchy, and the church. This was unacceptable to Tolstoy. He had earlier denounced aristocracy and embraced Christianity. He saw the Doukhobor beliefs as an example of his religious philosophy. With the Society of Friends, Quakers, in the UK, Tolstoy appealed to the Tsar to grant permission for the emigration of Doukhobors to a country which would accept the Doukhobors with a condition of being exempt from military service. Tolstoy used the proceeds from his book Resurrection to make the immigration of 7,500 Doukhobors in 1899 to Canada. In 2016, I traveled to Russia, Turkey, and Georgia to visit those areas where the burning of the arms took place. I also visited Yasnaya Polyana, Tolstoy's former family's estate. At Tolstoy's graveyard, it was a simple mound of stacked earth. I spent some time reflecting on my Russian roots, and I expressed deep gratitude. I found it easy to talk to folks from all walks of life, from vendors to servers to cafes. In cafes, in hotels, hotel clerks, museum guides, taxi drivers, and many more. Russian was my first language, although rusty, but it served me well. Learning from all the folks that I was meeting that I was from Canada, I was plied with questions. What do the Canadians think of Russia? What about Putin? What about the Ukrainian uprising, etc.? I was embraced as though I was family and immediately had a sense of belonging. In addition to the story of the Doukhobors in Canada, people were positively intrigued and delighted to learn about Canadian Voice of Women who went to the former USSR to meet with Russian women in defiance of the Cold War. I was so proud to share the Voice of Women values in the long history in the promotion of world peace, a world without war, demilitarization, and the abolition of nuclear weapons. The efforts of Voice of Women's extensive work, taking a leading role for peace and nonviolence globally. Invitations were offered to members indicating for me, please invite the Voice of Women for a return trip. It was just so heartwarming for me to hear that kind of camaraderie, I guess I could call it. I also visited with Doukhobors who had not immigrated to Canada and remained in Russia and Georgia. But the daughter of my great-grandmother who remained behind is yet to be traced through genealogy. But Voice of Women and supporters, I really hope there will be an opportunity in perhaps 2021 or 2022 to make a return visit and to meet with so many peace-promoting, peace-building folks in Russia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm going to turn to to Lynn to introduce the next speaker. Lynn, you're introducing, I think.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you, Hannah. That was a really wonderful trip down those particular memories and what you'd heard from others in the past. Thanks for sharing that story. I'm now going to introduce Rayna Zayman. And as I do, I'm just going to say that we have members right across the country. We're not necessarily saying where they are, but Hannah's a board member and she's in BC. Mary Lou's been in Winnipeg and now in Ottawa. And you know, Richard is in Ontario. Now I'm going to introduce Rana Zayman, and she is in Halifax. So Rana is also one of our board members. She's a Muslim, she's a Pakistani immigrant, and she's an award-winning social activist, volunteering on several boards. She works at the grassroots level with marginalized communities, including new immigrants or migrants, and helping with various issues such as poverty, feminism, intersectionality, racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, human rights, justice, and bullying. Thank you, Rana, and welcome.
Thank you, Lynn. It's such an honor to be here today and to listen to all the wonderful stories. One of the most frightening memories from my childhood was when I was abruptly awoken from a deep sleep in the middle of the night by my mother, frantically yelling for me to get up and follow her along with my siblings. I could hear the sirens as we stepped out of our apartment, and I saw other families making their way down the corridor. In the hustle and bustle, I vividly remember being shoved under a staircase along with other children. The next morning, after a night of bombing, we went out to survey our surroundings and came upon a building that had been damaged, but its staircase was still standing. That is when I realized why parents were shoving us under the staircase, so that we may survive. It also dawned on me that it meant that they would not, because they weren't under it. Our family moved to Canada in 1972, seeking safety, refuge, and the opportunity to build a better life. With hard work and determination, my parents gave us the best life they could provide, and we as children tried our best to fit in and be like everyone else while still trying to respect our parents' wishes and culture. Fast forward to adulthood. After a successful arranged marriage, almost 35 years coming up, we raised 3 children, and I went on a pilgrimage to Mecca at the age of 50. Now you know my age. There I prayed and promised to dedicate my life to God if He would help bring unity to my little community of Nova Scotia. I became involved in community work and volunteered on several different committees. As a result, my network grew and my volunteering turned into activism. As an activist, I learned about the dark history of Canada, many injustices that have been perpetrated by it. I became an advocate for human rights, opposed racism, xenophobia, poverty, income and gender inequality, and more. Due to my community work, I was invited to an event and had the good fortune to meet Nova Scotia VOW members. These lovely ladies invited me to attend a meeting, which I did, and I was amazed by all the incredible knowledge and the gentleness that these women portrayed. I happily became a VOW member, and as luck would have it, the AGM and Peace Convention was right around the corner, and I was fortunate enough to attend in Toronto. During one of the workshops, a videograph was shown where I was shocked to learn how the arms sales had increased over the decades to various countries around the world, and how war had become a huge money-making industry, all based in the United States. That was a point when I came to realize how fragile and frightening our existence is. So many countries at war, many of which have nuclear armament. What guarantee do we have for a future for our children? One of the greatest moments of my life was being a VOW peace delegate to the United Nations. There, I realized the importance of having peaceful dialogue with women at the table. Not going to be invited to these tables unless we make noise so that the powers that be know that we are here, and we will not remain silent and allow them to continue making profit from the blood of our children and our fellow human being. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rana. And I'm now going to pass things back to Janice for the next introduction.
Thank you. Thank you, Rana. I have the pleasure of introducing someone who hardly needs an introduction. That is Kim Phuc. Kim is a Canadian now, but who came to us from Vietnam via Cuba. Her story of this harrowing journey is well known and in demand. Kim speaks widely, very widely, as a UN Goodwill Ambassador, and very frequently, and even more frequently with the passage of years, on behalf of her charity for war-affected children. I turn it over to Kim. She was having a little trouble getting on. I hope she got on.
I'm on.
Oh, good. Yeah. Welcome, Kim.
Everyone, what story is touched me so much. Now it's my turn. And wow, thank you. You have seen my picture 8,000 times, the Napalm Girl. It is a picture that makes the world gasp. A picture that defined my life. I am 9 years old, running along on Highway 1 in front of the unexpressionless soldiers, arms outstretched, naked, shrieking in pain and fear. I had not been targeted. Of course, I had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Those bombs have brought me immeasurable pain. Even now, some 40 years later, I am still receiving treatment for burns that cover my arms, back, and neck. The emotional and spiritual pain was even harder to endure. And yet, looking back at the past 5 decades, I realized that those same bombs that brought so much suffering also brought great healing. As a child, I was raised in the religion of Kaudai. For years, I prayed to the gods of Kaudai for healing and peace, but as one prayer after another went unanswered. And so I continued to bear the crippling weight of anger, bitterness, and resentment towards those who caused my suffering. And yet, despite every last external circumstances that threatened to overtake me, mind, body, and soul, the most agonizing pain I suffered during that season of life dwelt in my heart. I was as alone as a person can be. I could not turn to a friend. I was toxic. To be near me was to be near hardship. I was alone, atop a mountain of rage. Why was I made to wear these awful scars? Despite all that I had learned through Kaudai, that there were many gods, that there were many paths to holiness, that the burden of success in religion rested atop my own weary, slumped shoulders. But Jesus presented himself as the way, the truth, and the life. My salvation experience happened on Christmas Eve. It was in 1982, and I was attending at a small church in Saigon, Vietnam. The pastor spoke about how Christmas Eve, not about the gifts we give to each other, so much as it is about one gift in particular, the gift of Jesus Christ. As I listened to this message, I knew that something was shifting inside me. How desperately I needed peace. How ready I was for love and joy. So I invited Jesus into my heart. I experienced the kind of healing that can only come from God. I was finally at peace. In 1986, the Vietnamese government sent me to study in Cuba for 6 years. I met my friend, Tuan, and we married in Havana in 1992. We were permitted to go to Moscow for our honeymoon. On the way back to Cuba, our plane was scheduled to stop in Gander, Newfoundland for 1 hour to refuel. That hour seemed to last a lifetime because during it, I made a life-changing decision to defect. We were allowed to stay in Canada, but we had no money, no friends, no language, and even no knowledge of the culture. We had nothing but faith. One of my friends gave me Nancy Pocock's information, and we came to Toronto to meet Nancy. She was a wonderful and lovely lady. I call her Mom. I am sure most of you knew Mom Nancy, because she knew you very well. And she introduced me to Canadian's Voice of Women for Peace. It was a great honor for me that Janice Alton invited me to be on board with VOWs family since 1998. Wonderful. Dear friends, my physical recovery was a challenge. My life in a new country was a challenge, but by far the biggest challenge was to learn how to forgive those who caused my suffering. When I think about how far I have come, the freedom and peace, I realize there is nothing greater or more powerful than the love of God. My faith has enabled me to forgive those who have hurt and scarred me. And it has enabled me not just to tolerate them, but truly to love them. I will forever bear the scars of that day. And that picture will always serve as a reminder of the unspeakable evil of which humanity is capable. That picture defined my life. In the end, it gave me a mission, a ministry, a cause. Today, I thank God for that picture. Today, I thank God for everything, even for that road, especially for that road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No wonder Kim is asked to speak so frequently. And Kim, I'll just add that when Nancy Pocock died, there were 6 funeral services for her, which gives you some measure of her esteem, of her helpfulness to people like you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. Very, very much appreciated that you're sharing. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mary Wynn Ashford. She is a retired family and palliative care physician. She's also one of our honorary board members, as is Kim. And Mary Wynn was the co-president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War and author of Enough Bloodshed, 101 Solutions to Violence, Terror, and War. Welcome, Mary Wynn. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, and thank you, Kim. So it's 3 a.m. and I'm wide awake for the 3rd night in a row. I am wrestling with reality and my refusal to act. And now it's come to this. What if there's a reason that I'm here? What if there's a reason that I was at that lecture and learned that there were 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world and that life on Earth could end in an afternoon? What if my whole life has built toward this? I was a high school teacher, an actor, a journalist, and a mother, and now I'm a doctor. If I say no, who do I think is going to say yes? Finally, what if there's a God? And this is a purpose I'm refusing. Finally, how long can I go without sleep? The next morning, a new patient came into my office. She had long hair and a long flowered skirt and army boots. And I looked at her and I said, "Are you in the peace movement?" And she said, "Of course." I said, "Well, I'm really worried about nuclear weapons and I don't know what to do. What would I do?" And she said, "Well, that's good. Come tomorrow night, Wednesday night, 7 o'clock to my house. Voice of Women's having a meeting." So I said, "Okay, great." It was 1984, and women all across Canada were rising up to stop the nuclear arms race. We were anxious And most of us were completely inexperienced in organizing. I can remember the leader said to us, everyone here has to learn how to chair a meeting, how to be the secretary, and how to be the treasurer. There were only about 12 of us, but the point was that we all had to develop the skills that were needed to lead a group. And we also needed to recognize that our fear of nuclear annihilation was greater than our fear of public speaking, or our fear of meeting government officials, or our fear of talking to our families and skeptical friends. So I put a bumper sticker on my car and parked it in the doctor's lot. It was like a neon sign. My car was the only car with a bumper sticker in the entire doctor's lot. I had one foot in the women's movement and one foot in the doctors' movement, and just so much to learn. Not only was I learning about the scale of this threat that we faced, but also that the threat was expressing patriarchal domination gone mad. A bunch of us went over to Vancouver to a big disarmament meeting, and we were in a hall there were 2 aisles and a microphone in each aisle and lines of men standing at the microphones. So at the break, the women all huddled, and the leader said, okay, the men are dominating the mics. So from now on, between every 2 men, there's going to be a woman. And one of the women went, oh my God, I can't do that. I can't just speak like that. I don't know what I would say. And the leader said, what do you think the men know when they stand up in line? They're working it out while they're standing there. So we went up and took our places between these astonished men. And I must say, the women were hard-hitting and articulate, and we were just amazed at what we were doing. Voice of Women redefined security. They refused to accept that weapons bring security. They said security means that a woman can walk anywhere at night and be safe, that a woman in her home can be safe from being battered, that a woman can choose when and if to have children, that she can have a well-paid employment outside the home, that she can stand for office. I remember that my doctor friend Eleanor Powell was sitting beside me at that one meeting, and she leaned over and she said to me, you know, the men are talking about the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. The women are planning revolution. That spring, we went to Halifax to the Women's Alternatives for Negotiating Peace Conference. It was a big Voice of Women conference, international conference. And one of the speakers was Dr. Ursula Franklin. Ursula was a German-Canadian, a physicist, a Quaker, a research scientist of really great renown. She had 40 honorary doctorates. She taught at the University of Toronto. She was bold and a fearless defender of women's rights and social justice. But I think that it was her wit and her common sense that just drew TV cameras to her wherever she went. So at that meeting in Halifax, the CBC came up to interview her, and the interviewer said, Dr. Franklin, why are women so concerned about nuclear weapons? She looked straight at them and she said, because women have a low tolerance for crap. I think that's what I love the most about Voice of Women, our low tolerance for crap. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mary Wynn. Thank you for sharing that. And back over to Janice.
The last speaker in our first set of stories is Yinka, Yinka Oyalowo. And Yinka is on our board now. We're very happy to have her. And this year we've even roped her in to be a secretary. That's quite a heavy role, and Yinka agreed quite readily, actually. Yinka is a lawyer who specializes in labor and human rights law, and writes about international law. Alongside litigation work, she provides advice to employees and serves on, as I mentioned, on the board of Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. Yink has been with us for a little over a year now, and we're very happy to have you. Over to you, Yinka.
Thank you. I love VOW, so I'm very, very happy about the past year and being able to learn from all of you wonderful women. One of the last wars I watched was waged against a Black man crying, handcuffed, his face to the ground, a knee at his neck. And then there was the silent Breonna Taylor, her body motionless and riddled with bullets, lost in a battle of guns. Each of these painful events made me wonder, what does it take to make peace with war when the world is restlessly violent? The Canadian Voice of Women for Peace used its voice, loud and clear, to mobilize as an ally against violence and hate. The answer will never be silence in the face of adversity, or silence as an answer to hate. Besides, I've only ever enjoyed silence coupled with stillness when I venture into the great outdoors. Peace Camp gave me that vision. That is where I met my sisters who refused to keep quiet. Across the nation, here in Ontario, or even through a screen, each woman has a voice. In late September, when the trees consent to drop their leaves, women with roots from around the world consent to meet in peace. In the evening of my first day at Peace Camp, we built a fire together. And in the dark, we sat around a shared flame that lit up our faces, enlightening the qualities of togetherness as permanent, everlasting, and unchanging. Warmed by our connection, I was inspired by the women around me. United from each nation, we called our activism home. The next day, we had a scavenger hunt. We searched for ways to change the world. We found clues within nature, and through listening to each other's stories, we traveled to regions beyond our senses. I traveled to Syria through a sister's story of the pain and devastation of war. I traveled around the world and looked for all the answers with my sisters in tow. What does it take to make peace with war when the world is restlessly violent? The question is essentially a scavenger hunt. I learned that when a political system tries to propagate its philosophy, a great deal of effort and strategy is required through finance and militarization. But our wish to benefit others, VOWs' wish to change suffering caused by war and military spending, is born from a will to act. Activism means that we can never be silent in the face of adversity. I held on tightly to those beliefs that I learned in 2016. They were like the pink quartz crystal and amethyst bestowed upon me by my Indigenous sister at Peace Camp. I want VOWs Peace Camp to embody the pink quartz crystal, a place for young women from around the world to continue to learn activism as the basis of compassion and healing for the world. And like the amethyst crystal, relieving us all from the stress, strain, fear, and anxiety of violence within the world around us. But still, this question remains. What does it take to make peace with war when the world is restlessly violent? Peace Camp taught me that compassionate love is a natural remedy to hate, exclusion, and climate change, a steady state of defilement of our Mother Earth. I learned from my Indigenous sister at Peace Camp when she spoke of the sacred nature of the land we have been loaned to pass on and on to others who will have to bear the ills of our borrowed time. When we spoke about hope at Peace Camp, I never imagined that I would need it as much as I do today. Violence seemed faint, distant, but still heard at that time. Now violence, even death, is shared all over social media, and we are consumed with pain from around the world. The silver lining, despite the dark cloud, is that the response to George Floyd's death has strengthened our protest to make the world a better place. When we spoke about gender equality at Peace Camp, something snapping or being trampled upon, that has changed. I am now glad to be a part of a group of young women inspired by Kamala Harris, for example. Our dreams of equality manifesting slowly but surely. VOW has taught me that our history can be transformed. To be free of wars on the basis of sex, race, sexuality, or religion. To have a world free of military weapons. VOW can purge the hate and violence that we have normalized against each other and against nations. We can be a cure through collaboration and activism with women around the world. VOW is the medicine that the world needs right now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yinka. And Yinka has referred to the Peace Camp, and that's an initiative that we began, I think it's about 7 years ago now, and across the country in various locations in BC, in Nova Scotia, and in Ontario. We try to be a host to about 20 women, intergenerational host, but it does attract, and we want to attract young women. And we hope that we can keep up this practice of these peace camps, because obviously it has been a stimulus for wonderful people like Yinka. So thank you, Yinka, for telling us that story.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. And maybe we can all just express our appreciation for the stories we've had in the first half, even by just raising our hands. For some of you, have used the reaction button at the bottom of the bottom bar. But before we go on the break, I just have something I'd like to share with you. Here we go. So before we go on our break, I'm just going to say how much we appreciate all of your support, your interest in being here tonight to enjoy these stories. I don't know about you, but I'm loving these stories tonight. And whether you are a member, a donor, a volunteer, you're helping us to raise our voices. You're helping us to build this movement. It's a really important time for us to be raising our voices, because if we are going to build a culture of peace, work to bring Canada to sign the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and to redirect military spending from fighter jets to human environmental needs, we need our women's peace voice to be strong. So we invite you to consider becoming a member, joining our monthly peace plan, or making a donation, which will be matched. Thanks to a generous donor, any donation you give us tonight or your monthly peace donations, they will be matched. You can donate at the link that I will put in the chat. Or if you'd like to join the monthly peace plan, please send an email to Vanessa and she can make those arrangements for you. So certainly tonight is free. We're glad to share this with you. It's really our celebration of our 50th anniversary. And I'm just giving you the information in case you are able to help us in that way. And as I say, there's many ways to help build peace, and we appreciate all of them. Okay, so I'll pop that in there, and we'll invite you to take a stretch and come back in 5 minutes. And certainly you can just stay here on the same chat line if you're comfortable, and we'll come back and have several more stories. Okay, thanks everyone.
No.
And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. In every city, town, and village, across this wide and wintry land. In every city, town, and village, across this wide and wintry land. May each one of us make a start to let peace live within our hearts. May each one of us make a start to let peace live within our hearts. And everyone needs their punch and speak their swords, live in patience, shall learn war no more. And everyone needs their punch and speak their swords, live in patience, shall learn war no more. May each one of us make a star across the sword and wintry land. May each one of us make a star across the sword and wintry land. May each one of us make a start to let peace live within our hearts. May each one of us make a start to let peace live within our hearts. Dona no peace, pacem, pacem. Dona no peace, pacem. Dona no peace, pacem, pacem. Dona.
I was in a singing group called the Images Ad Hoc Singers, and we used to sing all kinds of wonderful peace songs and justice songs, and on Christmas, Donna Noche.
They're beautiful songs, aren't they?
Yeah.
I would love to just hand it to Sandy for one moment so that people, if they are interested in the song singing, just email Sandy and she will give you all of the information for it. Sandy, would you like to tell everyone?
Sure. That was a CD that I made with two friends, Rose Vaughn and Katrina Talbot. We did it as a fundraiser for Voice of Women and the Halifax Peace Coalition. And we had the pleasure and honor of all three of us having our daughters sing on it as well. And my daughter, Lise Cormier, is in the audience here tonight as well. It was a great experience. We got the best musicians in Halifax. Everyone donated their time and their expertise. We had many community groups and individuals sponsoring individual songs so that everything was paid for and all the money that we made was donated to peace. So yeah, I'm happy to talk to anyone. If you want access to the songs, let me know. I put that in the chat.
Thank you, Sandy, for sharing that wonderful music, beautiful harmonies. And this is our time for remembering to end all war. This is part of our purpose and part of why we do our annual meeting and some kind of celebration like tonight. at this time of the year. So we'll maybe say a little bit more about that later on in the program. But right now I'd like to turn to the person who's going to share the next story with us. And that is Yusur Al-Barani. And Yusur is a former member of our board. We really miss her. She used to be in Toronto, but now she is in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. She's a communication professional, a journalist, and a human rights activist. And we welcome you to share a story with us tonight, Yusur. Thank you. Yusur also was part of our peace camp that was mentioned earlier. So many good memories from there. Thank you, Yusur. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Len, for the introduction, and thanks to Janice and Vanessa, everyone who organized this, and all who are joining us tonight. Luckily, I seem to live in a safe haven, away from the sounds of bombs, wars that shatter nations and leave unhealed wounds. I decided to not take this for granted. Living in peace and at peace is a privilege that I am aware of. I was invited to join VOWs' first youth camp. And later, VOWs' tireless members and mentors helped me to attend UN's Commission on the Status of Women. And later, I became a member of the executive board. I'm grateful to Canada's only feminist organization that's dedicated for peace and to peace and end of war. If you know my background, you will know why I'm really very thankful and grateful. So let me share my story. In the midst of armed conflicts, I was born on January 1990 in Baghdad to brave parents, 2 physicians who went to medical school with one goal, saving people's lives. Just like many other young men, my father was enlisted in the military upon his graduation, just right on time to be in the middle of the Iraq-Iran war. No, he didn't want to fight. He didn't believe in taking up arms. And at the beginning in 1987, he was deployed in Basra, southern Iraq, known for its beautiful, tall, proud palm trees that were burnt down. As an Army's medical doctor, he ended up not only treating wounds, but amputating limbs when all solutions ceased to work. He was helpless, having to witness the death of his comrades, friends, soldiers, and writing their death certificates. Soldiers, all of those enlisted, had no option. They either fight or would face death. Those who attempt to escape the army get caught, and they would be sent to the execution cabin, not far from where my father stayed in the military. But he had hope and glimpse of inner peace and joy every time he thought of his wedding plans and my mother, who was later deployed in another town as a civilian doctor. War scenes never left his mind. He was sent to the north, an environment that he was never familiar with. On the top of cold mountains, not as cold as it's in Yellowknife here, but it snowed, unlike the rest of the country, and where life was harsh. He made commitments to see my mother, and to the best of his means, he saw her. But every goodbye felt like a farewell. Many of their cousins were killed in the war. It was an expected destiny. Iraq-Iran war ended in August 8, 1988. No winner in the war, destruction, loss, and death. My parents got married. Their first years of marriage were filled with memories of wars and conflicts, but yet their love for each other made their times with one another filled with joy and peace. Saddam viciously attacked the north, and my father was trapped there. My mother, on the other hand, was deployed to the south, and I was born. Saddam, the dictator, decided to invade Kuwait, and Iraqis were dragged yet to another war. Kuwait, close to the southern border, And that meant my mom would have been busy in the hospital, especially after the US coalition intervention. My mom's maternity leave was over and she was back to the South, so was my dad. And I was with her. I accompanied her even to the hospital, to the operations theater. I was a toddler, yeah, and my mom saved lives. There was no daycare. Tired of wars and a cruel dictatorship, Iraqis in the South revolted against the regime in what's known as Iraqi Intifada or uprising in 1991. And my parents were there, they were treating the wounded with no discrimination. Until one day, my mom was ordained to be investigated by the military. She was falsely accused of ignoring wounded soldiers and supporting the uprising. She sympathized with the protesters, but treated all with care and passion. If charged by the military court, she would face death sentence. Her coworker was executed in the hospital, shot to death for treating wounded protesters. Being in the military himself, my dad accompanied her to the investigation, pretending that he was well-known pro-regime military member. He was not, but he was good at pretending. They left the room while being told they would appear at the court in Baghdad. And my parents silently and swiftly fled Iraq. They did everything they could to ensure that I live a life filled with peace. What they had no control over is my experience. No childhood memories with my grandparents, not knowing my extended family, aunts or uncles, not meeting them until 2004 when I was 14, where I was stranger in what my parents called home, Iraq. The war, dictatorship, and occupations are all not enough to waver my parents' resiliency. This resiliency is our peaceful weapon. I might not have memories with my grandparents, but I am resilient thanks to my parents. And this is what I found in Canadian Voice of Women, resiliency. Yeah, that's our weapon of peace. So stay resilient, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, you, sir. That is a very moving story, and we really appreciate you sharing with us. Mm-hmm. And I'm now going to hand over to Janice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lynn. I have the pleasure of introducing someone that I referred to earlier tonight, that is Marian Kearns, because Marian really led the way for us in our UN work, which has been very steady since and expanding, as Mary Lou Mcvedron alluded to earlier as well. So Marian, we thank you for that so much. And I want to introduce Marian and her background. She's a retired social worker teacher. She's a community developer, and obviously she's a peace activist. And she's the biographer of VOW member Muriel Duckworth, a familiar and revered name for many of us. She's the mother of 6 children, the grandmother of 13. Does that match you, Richard? Well, grandparent. And she says she's the great grandmother of 6, that is 6 thus far. So welcome, Marian. We look forward to your story.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you very much. Well, 35 years ago, Voice of Women Canada held an international women's conference from June 5th to 9th, that was in 1985, at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It was entitled The Urgency for True Security, Women's Alternatives for Negotiating Peace. This conference was attended by 350 women from 35 countries, including every continent, and supported by 135 Canadian women's groups from across our country. The Canadian women who attended it, in turn, came from 14 earlier peace conferences organized locally by members of Voice of Women. The Women's International Peace Conference was 16 months in the making, and I was the lucky woman chosen to coordinate it. Our aim was to define how women worldwide want peace and how we would negotiate conflicts. I was also lucky enough to have available to me at a moment's notice the experienced help and wise advice of women like Muriel Duckworth, Kay McPherson, Ursula Franklin, and Alice Weiser. Generous financial support from several government departments enabled us to bring women from countries from the South. Margaret Fulton, president of Mount St. Vincent University, made office space available to us and smoothed every wrinkle. My staff of 3 persons, aided by no less than 100 volunteer women from Halifax and Dartmouth, created an atmosphere of loving care and gracious welcome. Food dishes from many countries, flowers decorating every discussion room, available translation services, a daily conference newspaper printed overnight, a prayer room set aside and decorated with symbols of world religions, yoga offered at dawn each day, as well as daily exercises. We celebrated evenings with performances, singing and dancing, and finally finished with a spontaneous snake dance right through the auditorium. Then we involved many women in panel presentations in the plenary sessions and in leading 23 daily small group discussions. Now, what came out of this conference? A summary written by Anne Crosby states, in 3 days, 350 women from 35 countries, exercising trust, compassion, understanding, and compromise, wrote, revised, and ratified a general conference statement, a 7-page list of action plans, and 73 affirmations with emphasis directed towards 16 countries and the relationship between national problems and international intervention. As one woman remarked, men couldn't do that even with secretarial help. Flexibility became the key word. When it became apparent that the needs of the delegates were not to be met by the conference design, the design was changed. The Saturday plenary was changed to give support to women from third world countries who were at risk from coming to this conference. A giant effort, to be sure, but had we really succeeded in defining women's alternatives for negotiating peace? My secret fear that we might not produce something unique to women vanished when I saw the 2 instances where delegates submitted statements with differing views. In the first instance, the affirmations between the Jewish Israeli and the Palestinian women differed on what should constitute legal rights and legal borders. In the second instance, the Indigenous women from Canada had separate views concerning the status of Native women who had married non-Native men and how funds should be provided for housing. Despite their differing views, each of these discussion groups recommended to the entire conference that these affirmations be accepted with the understanding that given sufficient time, a consensus would grow between them. Their requests were unanimously agreed to by the Assembly of Delegates. Lillian Blanc, in her summary about the Women's International Peace Conference, wrote in French that her own attendance was not only a privileged moment, but a leap towards a greater effort. She concluded, "One primary and all-embracing requirement for negotiations is love." I believe that women demonstrated that we can and will bring not only skill, but love into peace negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marian. Do you think we could repeat that? That was a very big effort. Maybe we could, maybe we should. Thank you.
It would be nice.
Thank you very much. Oops. There we are. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sandy Greenberg. You've already met Sandy because Sandy brought us the music. And I want to, and Sandy has been a board member with many of us for several years. We've really appreciated her many contributions. And she's a dedicated peace activist with both Canadian and Nova Scotia Voice of Women for Peace. She's a singer, songwriter, and musician performing peace and women's songs. And she's a full-time children's entertainer with her partner, Thomas Cormier, in the duo Razzmatazz for Kids. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you, Lynn. All right, here's my story. There certainly have been times with my sisters in Voice of Women when the forces pulling us apart seemed stronger than the ones holding us together. The threads of connection can get frayed and broken. One indelible moment was when I was accused in a phone message of letting down Muriel Duckworth. And there's Muriel Duckworth right there, posthumously, and indeed the entire peace movement. At the time, I was on the national board, the Nova Scotia Steering Committee, and the committee planning our Peacemakers Camp for young women. You see, I hadn't agreed with the camp committee decision, and I believed we hadn't looked at the budget in enough detail to justify it. But the majority in the committee had ruled. So I called a meeting of the steering committee, where majorities don't rule, but where we strive to make decisions by consensus. I thought this was appropriate because the steering committee was ultimately responsible for any financial decisions. Others obviously disagreed and thought I was completely out of line and worse. Well, we had our meeting with a pelting rainstorm outside. The ideas, feelings, concerns, and solutions circulated around my kitchen table. It was awkward, but we did it. Governing by consensus is hard, especially since we're so used to looking up at the pointy top of a pyramid for direction. However, I like to imagine consensus as a beautiful necklace, with each of us an interesting, unique bead. After that meeting, even though some tensions remained, I know we all modeled peace at the camp, because one of the campers said that what impressed her the most was how we older women, the organizers, worked so well together. Although in planning our camps, we continued to struggle with some organizational issues, I'm extremely proud of what we did together over the 5 years when we had our camp. It was freely offered as a gift at the idyllic Thinkers Lodge, home of the 1957 Pugwash Conference on Science and World Affairs. which was dedicated to averting nuclear war. When our campers posed for a picture in front of the all-male portrait of that first conference, we could finally say, here are the women. We shared so much important knowledge at our camps. A Mi'kmaq elder taught us that the Peace and Friendship Treaty of 1752 makes us all treaty people. A doctor from Physicians for Global Survival opened our eyes to the ongoing nuclear threat. A representative of the Dallaire Institute discussed child soldiers. We connected peace and environment, acting out birds migrating and learning about pollution threats to Halifax Harbor. We discussed racism, feminism, militarism, and the gift economy. We learned the moves for a flash dance. We did peace art. We sang peace songs. And we washed away our worries while swimming in the warm, salty waters of the Northumberland Strait. Most importantly, we brought together young women who were passionate about peace and introduced them to each other. Many have stayed in touch with each other and with us. The friendships that I sustained with some of the campers have enriched my life immensely. And I hope that I've been able to give them some help and guidance along their paths. Canadian politician Peter MacKay once famously said to Alexa McDonough, "Stick to your knitting." It was meant as an insult, an attempt to challenge a woman's place in the public sphere. It was a ludicrous statement to a woman who had spent most of her adult life in elected office while also raising 2 sons. He was saying that she should leave the affairs of the world to men. And of course, we all know how well that has turned out. But maybe Peter was onto something. This world needs women. It needs us knitting. We can take a ball of wool and create something that wasn't there before. That's magic. The world needs us knitting. It needs us knitting peace, knitting together people, ideas, communities, diverse groups, picking up the dropped stitches, mending the frayed and broken connections, fixing the holes. And while we're at it, let's crochet too. In Nova Scotia, we are crocheting white poppies right now because we want to show the world that peace is possible and that it can be achieved 1 stitch at a time. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Sandy. And certainly knowing how to repair clothes, to mend, to make, to create, that is a wonderful path to peace as well. So thank you as well for showing us those lovely crocheted poppies. Beautiful. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Cassia Sequoia Slavner. And I just love Cassia. She's one of our youngest members, and she will share her story with you today. She's an award-winning Gen Z documentary filmmaker, the founder of Global Sunrise Project, a youth-led social enterprise that creates positive impact media. And Cassia's film, The Sunrise Storyteller, you may have seen. If you haven't seen it, that's her first film. She's now working on her second. If you haven't seen it, it would be a wonderful opportunity to see it sometime soon. Hopefully we can offer that to you. So thank you and welcome, Cassia.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you to everyone in this wonderful community who's already shared their stories before me and also their decades of activism before me. So I'm going to share my story. A peace picnic set me on the trajectory for my life's path. I've always been close to my single mom, and since I was little, I tagged along to events that brought together social justice advocates from all walks of life. I didn't usually participate, but I absorbed the conversations that happened around me. Conversations about feminism and environmentalism. At 13 years old, awkward and unsure of myself, my mom brought me to one of VOWs' annual events, a peace picnic on an idyllic July day in Janice Alton's Port Credit backyard. I was still a kid going through a growth spurt and, like I mentioned, shy and awkward. So I figured my best place to sit would be, was in a seat with tons of shortcakes to spare while my mom went around and did the connecting. She chatted with other activists. But I distinctly remember Lynn Adamson telling her about the first summer peace camp for youth. I was too young to join at the time, but they made an exception for me. I became the youngest member to join the organization and would attend my first peace camp later that summer. When the day arrived, my mom and I packed up the car and headed to camp. I was really excited. This was my first real interaction with VOW. Youth and elders came together to learn, bond, celebrate, and plan next steps for action. I learned about the UN Resolution 1325 through a play read by my campmates, imagined what it would be like to experience nuclear catastrophe through a simulation game, and felt nourished through conversations around long stretches of dining room table, eating healthy and delicious food. These were the moments where I first became a peace advocate. As camp came to a close, Janice flagged my mom and I's attention to another incredible opportunity to be part of a delegation to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Janice had been leading VOW's delegation for decades, but spearheaded the charge to run a youth-focused delegation the next year. And I was invited, with my mom chaperoning, of course, because again, I was too young. I'd never traveled internationally at the time, and this chance to be in a place where the whole world converges filled me with excitement. I never would have guessed that this trip would change my life in the way that it did. So as New York City began to defrost in March, I set foot on the pavement at 27th Street and 7th Avenue for the first time after a sleepless 12-hour megabus ride. Thousands of people from every corner of the world were descending upon the city for the 57th CSW. And the theme for the conference that year was the elimination of violence against women and girls. The energy at this conference was electric, and there was a sense of hope in the air as people exchanged ideas about solutions for the challenges they faced. There was such a strong sense of togetherness and community, which kind of countered the strict bureaucratic format of the UN, all these women coming together to bring up radical solutions. The people that I met and the stories they shared, but more importantly, their determination to rise above adversity really inspired me. Something had changed within me as I returned home to Toronto. I felt a sense of purpose beginning to develop as I reflected on this transformative experience. I realized that the narratives that I had heard at the UN, compared with those of the mainstream media, didn't exactly align. There's poverty, there's war, there's inequalities that exist all around the world. I heard first-hand accounts of this when I attended the conference. But I noticed that the news paints these issues with stereotypes and sensationalism. It failed to recognize the agency, creativity, and innovation of grassroots leaders. As a girl in her early teens, I didn't quite know how to describe these feelings. All I knew was that as a concerned citizen of the world, when I looked at the news, I felt scared and overwhelmed and anxious. I thought about the ways that I could help. And at the time I had a hobby for taking photos. An aha moment came to me. What if I could share the stories just like those of the people that I had met? Could others be just as inspired to take action by these stories as I had been? I decided to use my creativity as a means to express my activism. And despite the imposter syndrome that raged on in my head, I decided that even with no filmmaking experience, I could make a documentary at the age of 16. I wanted to make a film about people in the global community making a difference despite all the odds they were faced with. And I would have to convince my mother that I was capable of this too. Missing my second year of high school was only a small obstacle in my mind. Raising the money to go out and take on this project was a bigger concern. So after months of nagging and convincing and a year of fundraising, my mom and I hit the road for 6 months, and we traveled to South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Thailand. After coming home from 6 months abroad, a life-changing trip, and 2 years balancing my studies with editing a feature documentary, the Sunrise Storyteller would be released in 2017. It premiered at the UN CSW, and this was a full circle moment for me, as I got to share it in the place where the idea was born, with the people who made it possible for this idea to come to life. Most importantly, my hunch about positive storytelling has resonated with most of the people who I've shared the film with, especially young people wanting to embrace their own personal power to make a difference. And when I reflect on the past 8 years, I know that none of this would have been ever possible without the support and mentorship of my lovely friends at VOW. None of this would have happened if I hadn't attended that first picnic for peace, also known as the Strawberry Social. And I want to say thank you to VOW, and I hope to see the organization continue to grow within my lifetime as new generations take on its powerful and important mandate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cassia.
I'd love to see that film.
Yes, we need to
get to it.
And Lynn, maybe I'll add a little PS there that film Cash is referring to, the first one that she made, has won so many awards. I lost count at 28. What is it now, Cassia?
You got it, or my mom's reminding me there's one additional, it's 29.
29. You can tell how wonderful a job she did with that.
Where can you see it? We'll have to set up a screening, I think. Life is so different these days under COVID. We're doing everything on Zoom. So I don't know if we can do that. Maybe we can.
We want to make mention.
Please.
Go ahead. Turn off your Kim Fook is also in the film.
Marla, we're getting echoes. So this is Marla, introducing Marla. See if you can.
Cash's mom.
Cash's mom. Also a board member, which we're very grateful for, and very inspiring in our work for peace. So I think she wanted to share about Cash's new film. Maybe we can do that at the end if we can't do it right now. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Janice.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Cassia. I have the pleasure of introducing our last speaker, Bridget Grant. And we've had the opportunity to get to know one another over how many decades, Bridget? Probably 4 at least, when we've both been connected with the organization, served on the board, and at one point we used to operate as sort of twins from between those like myself in the on a committee, an organizational committee, which we don't have anymore, and that was responsible for keeping in touch with those that were further flung from Toronto. So Bridget and I were twinned in that way for quite a few years. Bridget has written me a very, very short little description of herself. I know it to be much more, but this is what she wanted you to know, that she is an artist and a teacher who has been a member of Canadian Voice of Women for over 50 years. I don't know, Bridget, whether, well, Marian, you would match that, and maybe there are more who are listening in on this call. So welcome, Bridget. We welcome your story.
Thank you so much. Mr. Dolk, principal and grade 8 teacher, brought a radio to class so we could hear the play-by-play in the final game of the World Series. He brought the radio again in 1951-52, which was my grade 8 year, so we could hear Winston Churchill speak live. I listened, cleaning my straight pen with scraps of blotting paper and spit, until Mr. Doak shouted my name and I stood up. "Communist," he yelled, and castigated me and my parents for several long moments. I was 13. My parents, Nora and Frank Toole, taught chemistry at the University of New Brunswick. Nora unpaid as a faculty wife for the first 2 years. Frank had been a stretcher bearer for the British Army in World War I, and disgusted by his experience, left Europe to study at McGill, where he later met Nora. In the 1930s, they followed political developments in Europe with alarm, later being dismissed as premature anti-fascists. They lived on the UNB campus from 1930 until 1945, when I was 7. Barry, my older brother, and I were aware of World War II. Nora and her friends packed parcels for refugees. Students, suddenly in uniform, dropped in to say goodbye. Frank put colored pins on a world map to show troop movements. Barry sat in the dark. Even in New Brunswick, we had blackouts, waiting for his mother to come home from meetings. We learned about rationing when each of us were given one small jar of sugar to last a week. We were allowed to listen to the conversation when adults like Kay and Bruff McPherson came in. I remember hearing the news of the nuclear bombing of Japan and our parents sending a telegram to Prime Minister Mackenzie King in protest. Decades later, I learned something about those meetings of Nora's. She was on a women's council with Muriel Ferguson, later senator, to bring the vote in municipal elections in Fredericton and New Brunswick to women without property. She was on the board of the YMYWCA. She and Frank started the first Home and School Association in Fredericton, and an old friend told me it was Nora who initiated municipal garbage collection. After 1945, adult conversation changed. It seemed less about making the world better for everybody and more about individual opportunities. Anyone who rejected all war and stuck to old friends, even communists, and held to the view that getting all sides together was the way to solve problems, risked being ostracized. When National Voice of Women formed in 1960, Nora joined and started the New Brunswick chapter. Kay Bedell, a soft-spoken member of the Women's Institute, who managed to get a resolution on peace in every Women's Institute yearly report, joined VOW at once. In 1982, Kay walked from Cambridge Narrows, New Brunswick to Manhattan to join the 1 million protesters and speak in Central Park in favor of a nuclear freeze. In 1983, she and Jim, her husband, paddled into the turbulent Bay of Fundy in a rubber dinghy to intercept the delivery of a calandria to the nuclear power plant at Point Lepreau. For over 50 years, the wonderful women of New Brunswick Voice of Women have knitted for the children of Vietnam, demonstrated, celebrated, marched, petitioned, written letters and briefs, worn white poppies, hosted speakers, reached out to schools, celebrated, and always encouraged people in government to choose peace and justice. That war, nuclear weapons, environmental destruction, and misogyny persist must be laid at the door of powerful interests which benefit from the egregious harm being done and have the power to shape society to their advantage. It is indicative of their success if you feel uneasy as I say this. The McCarthy era propaganda, which ruined the lives of so many decent people and provoked Mr. Dope to upbraid a 13-year-old, is nothing compared to the sophisticated propaganda today. Propaganda which inhibits and misdirects communication at all levels, erases all knowledge of the state torture of Julian Assange, transforms wars of asset stripping into morality plays, and shatters solidarity, making it almost impossible for people to join in a common cause. The Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, hanging on to each other and the absolute need for peace and justice, has so far survived. Long may it do so.
And you too, Bridget.
Well, it's getting a bit late for that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Bridget. And I have the pleasure of introducing our final speaker for the evening. So we have one more speaker, and then we will wrap up the evening with a thank you for joining us for tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce Vanessa. Vanessa Lanting is our inspiring, our brilliant, our super capable coordinator. She has so much kindness and compassion combined with the skills and dedication, and this is very much appreciated. And now Vanessa is going to share with you an experience from early in her time with VOW. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Lynn. So as the elevator neared the top of the Globe and Mail Center in downtown Toronto, I could feel my nervous heart pounding and pounding inside my chest. Each beat stronger than the last, as if it had decided that tonight was the night it was finally going to make a break for it. After expertly ducking the registration table by first heading to the washroom and finding a back way through to the lounge, I thought that I looked incredibly conspicuous carrying around 2 winter jackets and a scarf hanging over a large computer bag. It was either this or pay for an actual $250 ticket to attend a fundraising event hosted by NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, with the former Prime Minister Paul Martin. I decided carrying around my winter work gear was a much smaller price. Although I thought I didn't look like I belonged, a young volunteer didn't seem to notice and handed me a microphone to my raised hand for the Q&A. He did not realize that I was not authorized to be there. I leapt at the opportunity, knowing my fellow VOW sisters were freezing outside with protest signs. My questions to the former Prime Minister were these. As a defensive military alliance, what power does NATO have to ensure its members are not unilaterally instigating war and crimes against their own peoples? For example, Turkey's recent attacks on the Kurdish peoples after the US decision not to protect them anymore, despite the Kurds being on the front lines in the fight against ISIS. And secondly, how are we going to meet the financial requirements of spending 2% of our gross domestic product when we have so many social services that desperately need funding here at home? Both of these points were meant to critically question the logic and justification of this expensive military alliance and its claim that violent militarization of conflict is a successful strategy for Canada to keep its people safe, promote peace, security, and prosperity here at home and around the world. What I was not expecting was how many handshakes and accolades that I received afterwards for bringing these questions up. From what I gathered, most had received a ticket from their employer and came for the open bar, and were therefore not in a position to ask the hard questions with their bosses looking onwards. I, on the other hand, had not paid for a ticket, nor utilized the coat check, and I knew I had full support from VOW to critically question militarized security any way I saw fit. So what I have learned over the past year is that the voice of women has not and will never be afraid to speak truth to power and shine a light on topics that many Canadians are unfortunately in the dark about. After 1 year, I am so proud of the problems I've caused for those invested in the war economy, and I can't wait to make more. So for these last remaining months and in 2021, let's not be afraid to get creative, to get our voices heard and shine a light on peace issues that Canadians do care about, but just aren't aware of. Let us keep telling our stories because they want to be heard. Thank you so much for everyone being here tonight.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so it is now my pleasure to draw things to a close this evening. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for sharing this very special 60th anniversary celebration. And I have to say, I'm very thankful to our founders who started this organization so we can all be together today and carry on this work. And I'd like to share a very special thank you to Janice, who has been my co-chair for a decade and is now our past chair. Janice, your leadership has been absolutely outstanding, and your vision for this storytelling evening has developed into a very special event. I'd like to thank our storytellers. Every story you shared was so special and so personal and so meaningful. So thank you for bringing those stories to share with us. Thank you to Vanessa for your tech work to make this go so smoothly and for being our amazing coordinator. We thank all of you for your support, whether as a member, a contributor, or as a volunteer in one of our circles. It is Remembrance Day this Wednesday, a day to remember our commitment to do everything we can to end all war, and a day to remember all the victims of war. Wearing a peace poppy, I've got my peace poppy here, I don't know if you can see it, and it is meaningful. You can wear a peace poppy and it represents that we really care about the future, that we're working for the world without war. We hope very much that you will join us in our campaigns going forward. Do get our newsletter monthly. It gives updates on our work, and let's stay in touch. If you can work on a campaign such as the one on the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, we want to get Canada to sign. Do let us know. You can put a note in the chat if there's something that you'd like to work on specifically within VOW, or get in touch with Vanessa. Let's stay in touch and let's change the future together. Okay, so to close, I'd really like to invite everyone to unmute, and perhaps we can just all express our appreciation. You can do that. If we're unmuted, we can clap. Wave. We can go on out.
Thank you all so much.
It was amazing.
Thank you.
Love you, Marian Roach.
Love you all.
Thank you.
Thank
So powerful.
And
Tonight
was
wonderful.
Was recorded.
Thank you all.
Good
Marian, nice to see you again, Marian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn.
Yes. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Lynn. Stories are recorded.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Janet.
That movie.
We'll work on showing Cassia's movie.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I have some great photos, Marian. I'll send them to you.
Great. Yes, some photos would be wonderful. So,
and we did record tonight's event, so we'll be able to share that more widely.
Oh, good.
Thanks, Jen.
I really appreciate everybody's story, and someday I'll have a story as well.
Look forward to hearing it.
This has inspired us to go out and make some more stories. We can have another evening this year.
Thank you to the organizers for getting it all set up.
Yeah.
It really was very well done.
Yeah. It was wonderful that we could feature stories from all across the country and from different ages and backgrounds and from all over the world. So it's very special. So thank you.
I'm glad it's
brought us a different kind of gathering, and we can see people from all different areas of the world. It's wonderful.
And can we just express our appreciation to Janice. It really was her vision that we do this event.
Yes,
so
it
let's
was.
just say,
Thank
Janice,
you, Janice.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Janice.
Wonderful.
Good night.
Thank you, Janice.
Thank you for
Okay.
organizing.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, she's gonna make me.
There's
Bye.
Night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye, everyone. Everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.